Hey, Natasha Neese here, author of Rise Up and Rock, A Front Woman's Journey. And today we are going to read chapter 5, The Rare Trio and the Rise of the Quiet One. Just as Living Loving Lead was beginning to find its footing, the disorienting shock of COVID swept through the world like a tidal wave. For us, navigating the sudden uncertainty of a global crisis added an unexpected layer of complexity to our already fragile journey. In March 2020, as lockdowns descended and the world shut down, the entire music industry was forced into silence. The vibrant hum of live performance was replaced by an eerie, unfamiliar stillness. In the spacious stillness of that time, I listened to nothing but Led Zeppelin, holding fast to hopes and dreams of the future. I would lean against my warm stone hearth, losing myself in their music, slowly combing out the ends of my long dreadlocks to better emulate the golden crown of Robert Plant, shaping the longer feminine reflection of his lion's mane. In that quiet, in between world, I felt suspended in devotion, waiting for my hour to arrive. Years previous, I'd decided to lock my hair as an artistic self expression that came through my immediate family. As a child, I watched my mother gently rolling tufts of sheep's fleece into soft ropes between her palms before twisting them and feeding them into her spinning wheel. She was a weaver, a textile alchemist. Her loom stood like a massive altar in the center of the room, surrounded by walls of hand-dyed yarn, gold from onion skins, pink from berries, purple from bark. She spun magic from the mundane. I watched her transform bags of muddy sheep wool into strong, brilliant yarns, and then into exquisite blankets and shawls. Her rhythmic work fascinated my young mind and imprinted my psyche with the power of intention, the genius of nature, and the spiritual alignment of the beauty path. Decades later, it was my own children who inspired my dreadlocks in a very different way. We lived in an off-grid yurt on 40 acres outside of Ashland, gorgeous land I'd negotiated to purchase through sheer will and blessings. Having never watched TV, my sons thrived in their imagination. They played with Star Wars figurines for hours, and my oldest son, Zach, had a particular fondness for a female Jedi named Isla Sakura. I hope I'm saying that right. She was a Twi'lek, an alien warrior with thick tentacle-like leku flowing from her head like dreadlocks. Zach carried her figurine with him wherever he went like a talisman. She had a superhero appearance with those leku that I secretly admired. And of course, I wanted to be that superhero for my boys. So in 2006, upon returning from my first year at Burning Man, I locked my hair, and my dreadlocks became a living braid of timelines. They wove together the legacy of my mother reaching into the past with her old world earth magic of spinning wheels and wool, and my children reaching into the future with their heroic imaginations of distant galaxies and their inhabitants. I was suspended in the middle, anchoring the chain. Inspired by my mother and my children, my locks became a personal mythology, a quiet but powerful statement. I know who I am. When Dominic, JC, and I were finally able to reunite, the reunion was charged with a mix of excitement, relief, and reckoning. What began as a determined effort to keep the band alive quickly deepened into something more complex, a living laboratory of ego, opinions, and unspoken wounds. We were navigating the unseen terrain of who we were becoming, together and individually, inside an unpredictable new world. By mid-May, when the first cautious openings began, Roxy Ann Winery in Medford found a way to bring people together again. Mel, the venue's resourceful manager, began using their covered outdoor space to create socially distanced gatherings. Through her creative leadership, we found a way to bring our music back to life. It wasn't just about fun anymore. It was about communion with our community, a lifeline of reaching through the fear and fragmentation to create moments of carefree joy. On June 24th, we played Roxy Ann as a trio with Dominic on guitar and JC on bass and mandolin. I called it Living Loving Lead, the Rare Trio. Rare, mostly referring to the fact that it was a little raw. Without a drummer, we leaned into Zeppelin's folk roots, my vocals rising with passion and touching new edges of comfort and confidence. The Battle of Evermore was a highlight, and I was able to sing both parts of the interplay between Robert Plant and Sandy Denny. The audience embraced our trio wholeheartedly, drawn into the intimate, courageous, and unique energy we created. Still, as exciting as it was, I couldn't help but miss the full throttle electricity of a four-piece rock band. Months earlier, I had gone on a Harley motorcycle ride with JC and Randy. I hadn't ridden much since my mid-20s when I shipped my brand new flame-covered Harley over to Europe, rode it through several countries, and sold it for a profit that paid for the entire trip. Decades later, it was invigorating to be back on a bike. JC introduced me to another biker there named Mike, who was evidently a great bassist. Mike was a tall man in his late 20s with long dark hair, a China doll face, and big blue eyes. When our search for a drummer began to stall, I reached out to Mike and asked if he would consider stepping in on bass so that JC could shift to drums. JC had the skills. After all, drums were his first instrument, and we needed someone behind the kit. To my relief, Mike agreed, though not without hesitation. He voiced the concern that taking JC's spot might trigger resentment. And as it turned out, that concern was more than valid. JC made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't happy about moving to drums, even though he was a great drummer and well known for it. I agreed to pay him for his time learning John Bonham's drum parts because I wanted to honor the adjustment he was making. I even split the cost of a better mandolin with him so that he could have the opportunity to come up front and play during our acoustic moments, since his main reason for wanting to remain on bass was his desire to be more visible. But what began as a gesture of goodwill soon started to feel less like a generous offer and more like a bribe. JC demanded that once we found a permanent drummer, he intended to return to his original role as bassist. I was certainly open to the possibility, but I made no promises. I didn't know what the future held, and I didn't want to bind the evolution of the band to a plan I wasn't sure I could stand by. Still, in his mind, the line was drawn. Mike was a substitute, nothing more, temporary. But plans have a way of shifting in the presence of truth. The moment Mike plugged in and began to play, something clicked, undeniably, effortlessly. It was love at first sound. His accuracy, timing, and feel were next level. And beyond technical skill, he brought a quiet confidence and professionalism that settled the energy in the room. I felt it in my body. This wasn't just a sub stepping in to help. Mike was someone the band needed, and he was a much better bassist than JC. There was actually no comparison. I knew, even if I couldn't say it out loud yet, that Mike wasn't just filling in. He was the future. That truth, whether spoken out loud or not, must have landed with JC. His reaction to Mike's presence wasn't just discomfort, it was visceral disdain. He was so threatened and jealous that he could barely contain himself in rehearsal, often storming out from behind the drums and busting through the door to get away from Mike's steady presence. At a casual photo shoot for our first show together, His energy was unmistakably hostile. He glared at Mike, made a point to stand in front of him whenever possible, and exuded resistance so toxic it soured the entire session and looked terrible in the photos. He said he didn't want to take official pictures with someone he didn't consider a permanent member, or perhaps more accurately, someone he hoped wouldn't become a permanent member. But it ran deeper than optics. It was about territory, control, and sensing the slow unraveling of a role he wasn't ready to give up. When JC's hostility flared, Mike consistently remained composed, which set off JC even more. It was a textbook dynamic. I kept thinking to myself, if only JC could see the bigger picture. His resentment was beginning to erode the very connections he was so desperately trying to protect. Instead of stepping into his new role with professional maturity, he let his discomfort derail the flow, which, ironically, made him look worse and Mike even better. I didn't confront him. I was too afraid of what it might ignite. JC's emotional outbursts had me walking on eggshells, and the toll of that hypervigilance was quietly wearing me down. Amid the chaos, Mike's presence was a stabilizing force. His demeanor offered a needed contrast to the frequent friction between Dominic and JC. I loved both those guys, but the cycle had grown exhausting. Time and time again, communication breakdown. It's always the same. The heated arguments, the blow-ups, the tension that would crack and burn before eventually dissipating in a cloud of cannabis smoke and temporary resolution. Rehearsals became less about music and more about tiptoeing around volatility. Mike and I would steady ourselves, sharing knowing glances, while Dominic and JC worked out their latest combustion. Randy was incredibly enthusiastic about the band, though, especially now that his band, Hot Gossip, had finally been laid to rest after years of internal issues that had climaxed in a fistfight. Eager for some band bonding and good old-fashioned fun, he invited us over to his home for a barbecue on his expansive deck. We all sat around his outdoor table with his lovely wife, Brenda, and another musician friend, JD, not to be confused with JC. Drinking, smoking, and laughing. The table had a fire feature in the center, and Randy kept declaring in a playful accent, "We got fire! We got fire!" Mike wasn't used to smoking, and he decided to take a puff off a vape pen that hit him far harder than he expected. Sitting across from him, I noticed him getting quiet, pale, and a little unsteady. After a few minutes, he whispered, "I'm gonna go inside and lay on the couch." But the moment he stood, his body went limp. He sank backward dangerously fast, and JD caught him right before he hit the deck. Having experienced the same thing a couple times before, I knew exactly what he was feeling. I rushed over as JD gently lowered him to the ground, and I placed Mike's head in my lap. He was completely out for a few seconds before waking up, groggy, confused, saying he thought he was already on the sofa. We all gathered around him, comforting him. I stroked my fingertips across his sweaty forehead, trying to soothe him, with the intention of lightening the moment and normalizing the fact that Mike was stretched out on the deck for quite a while. I turned to JC and asked if he had ever passed out. I expected some calm, funny stories, unlike Randy's booming voice that would have had us all howling with laughter. But JC just shook his head and said no, but added that he sure tried to pass out many times. It was funny, endearing, and just a little sad. Later, Mike told me that waking up with his head in my lap made the whole ordeal not so bad after all. It was a bonding evening, but as the band room conflicts continued, my appreciation for Mike grew. I saw in him something rare, someone who could hold their center in the midst of attack, someone who showed up fully without making it about ego. He was also very attentive to me, anticipating what could be helpful, personally and professionally. And inevitably, that respect and appreciation turned into something more. There was an attraction between us, unique, unspoken, but undeniably present. I thought it couldn't go anywhere, as there was almost 20 years between us, and he was in a relationship. Although he shared that his girlfriend was really more of a non-sexual best friend roommate, both living at her parents' house. He told me that they thought alike, sharing a neurodivergent mind lock that would be too disturbing to break. So we made the most of our time together. She never came to rehearsals or shows, which meant Mike and I could relax and simply be ourselves. We were inspiring muses for each other. And in the middle of the storm of clashing egos, it was a relief to have someone else who could see through the nonsense to what was really happening. It was a highly charged group. JC hated Mike and wanted me. Mike and I wanted each other, and we both found Dominic attractive. And if Dominic had been much taller, that might have been its own tempting complication for me. I always knew that having sexy musicians in the lineup added to the show. That's rock and roll. But it was also a potential recipe for disaster.